And Washington went and visited them and basically said, when the war is over, you guys will be able to practice being merchants again. And in turn, they actually helped fund Washington's fight against the British Army. But Aaron Lopez was one of the main slave traders during that time. And then the other thing I found out during sort of my little research is what happened. Once slaves got to the colonies, there was a guy that had been brought over from Europe who basically showed plantation owners how to psychologically traumatize the males and the females in the colonies and on the farms, the plantations with the whip, exactly. And he would take the males, he'd find the alpha males, and he would whip them into submission, because now he would then have a psychological pull over the females, and he would make the males submissive to him. And I was sharing this with a friend of mine. It's absolutely tragic, but I still think that this practice goes on today in our culture, only it's much more subtle than a bullwhip. It's through advertising and commercials and marketing. What do you have to say about that?
Well, it seems to me that a lot of black men are effeminized because they seem safer when they're feminine. And a lot of black gay men have told me they feel that they are safer in this society because they are feminine and they are seen as harmless or less threatening because they act like a woman, and they feel like it's easier for them to move through without dealing with confrontation from white men.
Interesting. Very interesting. So do you think that what we're talking about here is kind of it's an adjunct to that somewhere down the line this is how this is manifested, and now it's purely psychological and it's triggered by commercials and memes and symbolism in our society?
Yes, it's always been that way. Like you said, yes, it was more physical at one point, and they realized they could not do that anymore, so they're constantly shifting the game.
Right.
But then you have to realize that we have a lot of black people that like the way that it is, and they exploit other black people. So, yeah, I see it's like a system within the system, or a dead nation within a nation. And I can't just say, white people and everybody else is the total problem.
Right.
What we are seeing, yes, is a condition as a result of a group. I wouldn't say all white people. Some would disagree and say that all white people are racist because they benefit from white supremacy, and they don't have to think about racism because they are not subjected to racism, and they get white skin privilege because they are white. However, I still don't believe all white people are racist. You have to realize, if you haven't already, there's still a deep level of racism that black people inflict upon each other with light skin, dark skin bullshit. Straight
Right.
hair, nappy hair, good hair, bad hair. This is still a very serious problem that causes black people to attack each other based on light skin, dark skin, European features, African features. Women and men still humiliate and degrade their children or other children if they have more African-looking features or darker skin, as well as the exploitation and the sexual subjugation and molestation of children. So a lot of this stuff we do to ourselves.
You're absolutely right. I mean, so the young woman that I dated for a while, she was enrolled in a private school that was all white, and she, really received a fair amount of grief from these white kids. And she stood up to them, and she didn't get a lot of support for standing up to them. This is in Maryland, by the way. And then when it got so bad, her mother decided to get her out of there. She put her in a primarily all black school. She said it was even worse because she wasn't dark enough. I mean, it was an incredible conundrum for her to have to deal with. And I couldn't even really understand. I could understand it, but I couldn't certainly emotional. I couldn't relate to it. And it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, you're fairly light-skinned yourself. Did you experience this?
I still do.
Yeah.
It's just still an issue.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's see if we can shift our conversation a little bit of this out of the first chakra. Let's go to the second chakra, because I really want to talk with you about sex, because I got to tell you, I live in California, and have you ever spent any time in California, by the way?
Not yet. I look forward to it.
All right. I think you'd be a superstar in California, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because right across the bridge from me is Marin County. And Marin County is the hotbed of what we call kind of Western Tantra. I mean, it is like, polyamory, Tantra, you name it, it's there, right? And but they talk about sex in this really kind of, I used to go to these like sort of, trance parties with trance music, and, it was all very Eastern and all very evolved and all very up in the head. And, it was almost like they had to have kind of like a spiritual excuse to have sex. And I kind of stepped away from it. Like, this is, like, I would listen to this music. I'm like, where's the funk? Where's the bottom end? Where's the sex in this music? You're giving me all of these, images of chakras and, all, these sacred imagery in this music, but I'm not really feeling the sex. And yet there was this whole sex culture related to it. But to me, it was kind of psychotic. It was like, it was out of body, really. But what I love about your videos is you get right down to it. I mean, you get right into that second chakra. You start talking about sex, and you're very real about it. And I love it. And I want to talk a little bit more about what your connection and how you perceive spirituality and sexuality, and where they literally and figuratively come together.
Well, I teach it in a way that it is intuitively given to me. And when I deal with sex, I first deal with the spiritual aspect of it, which is the subatomic core of energy that is the source for the physical projection of the hologram, the illusionary self that looks like the dense self that's supposed to be the origin of life. It is not. It's just a projection of the origin. So from that energy source is where sexuality comes from, because that is where your soul comes from. So that in itself reanimates the third dimensional projection, and intact, that's the etheric anatomy. So before you get to the flesh, where the soul is and where the energetic grid is, that's your etheric structure that holds a set of chakras and auric fields. So when I teach about chakras and auric fields, I also deal with penis chakras and vagina chakras, because people always talk about there are only, or the 7 main chakras, where actually there's a series of them. They're all over the place. There are millions of them, and there are different sets of them. When I was in New York on April 10th, I talked about the metaphysics of sex, part 1, and I talked about a set of chakras that are outside of the physical body, and that are encoded with not only numbers but language. So it's very important that you speak your natural language based on your bloodline, because that is the way you tap into your spiritual sexual essence. So whether you are having a one-night stand or a threesome, you are still having a spiritual sexual relationship. What determines if it's a high spirit or a low spiritual relationship, dealing with higher beings or lower beings that are kind of bound in the earth realm, is determined by the thought and the projection of the thoughts and the projection of energy. So I also teach that when you deal with the penis and the vagina, you are dealing with the very mind of God. So if you are having sex, it is very important to realize that it is a sex ritual. Sex is a ritual. It's a magic ritual. And it allows you to tap into the chakras and the auric field of every individual that you come in contact with prior to the physical manifestation of it, because sex is first mental. It's metaphysics of the mind. So when you have a thought and when you make a telepathic connection with someone, the grid for sexuality has already been set. So you already committed the sex act before you physically do it. Whenever you physically have sex, that's basically the third level expression of sex. And there are different beings that are in the sex organs, and when you have a sexual relationship and you raise the Kundalini energy, it also taps into whatever deities and beings that you have that are in your bloodline, but you're also tapping into those of the other person because you are tapped into their etheric anatomy.
That's amazing that you said that, because my experience with sex has always been multidimensional, and I've always felt as though that when I was engaged in the act of sex, and especially with somebody that was really aligned with me, that there was this incredibly open field. And I mean, there have been times where I've just felt completely, for lack of a better term, archetypal. That I always wasn't myself. I was bigger than myself, and same with the person with me, and that makes complete sense. Wow, that's powerful stuff. So when you think that, so when is it really the best? When can you really hit that optimal point when you're really feeling that you're in the physical act of ecstasy and intimacy, and yet you're really connecting on all these different dimensions? For you, how does that line up?
Well, I always tell people, too, sometimes you just have those connections with someone, and you don't have to get readings or do your astrological chart or deal with numerology. It's good to do, but I've also seen people do that and still not really be compatible, because just because someone is a sign that is compatible with yours still doesn't mean that everybody that has that sign is compatible with you, because it still depends on the time. I always say not only the physical time that they were born, but the consciousness of the sperm that is aligning with the egg, because there's a cosmic dance that they must do, and there's an aura that egg must give the sperm permission to allow her to drop the field, the auric field, and allow him to permeate the egg. So if there's conflict within the mind of the mother and the father that created that person that you are sexually attracted to, many times they have karma, although your signs are compatible, to work through that will cause like divisions with you. So the sex might be wonderful, but at the same time you're exchanging some of the person's karma. So and you're actually imposing it on your etheric field. So it's very, very important to be aware of who you are and be balanced, and you even need to be shielded when you are having sexual intercourse, because you don't know what beings are floating around. You don't know which ones are looking to breathe, to inhale and exhale from that experience. A lot of times people have walk-in beings that will come in during a sex act or even after a sex act, depending on what beings are hovering around the aura and the chakras of the person that you're having sex with. But when you know who you are, and you know that you've now only picked the type of people that are spiritually aware of the spirituality of sexuality, and you are both trying to achieve a goal of illumination and an elevation of the consciousness to make you stronger, wiser, better, because that's what sex is supposed to do. Then you actually go through a process of doing like a cleansing ritual, consecrating your space, meditating, actually tapping into each other's chakras to prepare. It's like a foreplay, you know, practicing your breathing, even your yoga and your exercising, even detoxing your body, really, really seriously taking this as a preparation for a ritual that's going to help to transform you. I talked about it when I was doing the metaphysics of sex, a 0-point ejaculation meditation technique, where a man can actually regenerate himself through sexual intercourse, because a lot of people teach that a man is not supposed to ejaculate a lot, that he's supposed to hold his sperm because he's losing his life force and he's taking off years of his life. Well,